A non-negotiable is something that involves talking to the people, like to the people we're trying to reach, whether that's your customers, your prospects, just leaders in the industry. Like, again, that's what I have seen work most effectively in my work as a content marketer. It's what I find to be most enjoyable.
Every B2B marketing team faces challenges when they have to do more with less. Should you build skills internally? Should you find a freelancer? Should you search for the right agency? This is Tech Qualified, a podcast for the scrappy B2B marketing teams. In each episode, Meredith Metsker, a senior content leader at a tech company, and Justin Brown, a marketing agency owner, uncover how marketing teams generate qualified opportunities with limited resources. Every episode helps you get one step closer to winning over your ideal customers.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Tech Qualified. I'm Justin Brown and I'm joined by my co-host Meredith Metsker.
Hey, everyone.
This show is brought to you by New North. New North specializes in working with B2B marketers who have to do more with less. When you partner with New North, you turn your small, scrappy marketing team into a growth engine. This show, as I kind of just alluded to, has a very specific audience. We focus on small marketing teams at B2B tech companies and how we can help them on this show to be successful with limited resources or budget or whatever it may be at their disposal. And Meredith, I know, you've been working on small, scrappy teams on a daily basis for years, and I do so at an agency. And despite the multitude of things that are challenges for small teams, one major difficulty, aside from having to do a ton with those limited resources, is consistently creating good, fresh content. So I want to dive into that a bit today, Meredith, and talk about how to build a lean content machine and talk about strategies for those scrappy marketing teams and how they can do that effectively. So just to set some context, I know, I don't know if you've ever, I don't think so, at least not in the last couple of jobs, worked on a 10-person marketing team or a 20-person marketing team. Can you describe the teams that you've been involved with in your last couple of roles?
Sure. Yeah, I've only worked on one kind of large marketing team, and that's when I worked at a public university.
Mm-hmm.
But the last 3 roles I've had in the tech industry have all been smaller teams, especially my last 2 roles where I was the solo content marketer. So like in my current job at uConnect, we're an ed tech company that sells to career services teams in higher ed. And there's 3 marketers. So there's me leading content and community. There's our VP of marketing. We have a product marketing manager and then 2 BDRs. So they're on the marketing team. They report to marketing, but they're not marketers themselves. And then in my last role at Stonely, was a customer support software company. I, again, was the only content marketer. We had like a demand gen person. We had a performance marketing manager. We had a VP of marketing. Again, a really lean team. So that's just kind of what I'm used to now. And honestly, I've come to prefer it just because I like the speed at which I can move on a smaller team and having less red tape. I ran into that a lot when I worked at a public university, and that's one of the reasons I left. So I think that's one of the perks of being on a smaller team.
And when it comes to creating content on a small team with limited resources, what do you think are some common misconceptions about what it takes to create good, fresh content consistently?
Yeah, I think one misconception is I think people just don't think it's possible with one person. Like you can't do a lot, but there's lots of tips and tricks, which I know we'll go into, that you can use to really make a big impact with just one person or a really small team, limited resources. Whether that's with creating kind of cadenced content or a program like that, which I know we'll talk about, or investing in partners, whether that's an agency like you all to help with production, whether that's a freelance writer, a freelance graphic designer. We use both of those here at uConnect. And it just helps me work in parallel with some of those people so that I can keep working on the strategy and other bigger projects and, outsource some of the, what would you call it? The more more routine type tasks that I can do. Sure. I have done them all.
Yeah.
but it's not the best use of my time anymore.
And how long ago did you get out of the higher ed world? I mean, I know you're in the higher ed world now, but on the B2B tech side, so you went to Stoneleigh. So how many years since you've left that world and gotten into the B2B tech world?
Yeah, about 6.5 years. I left the higher ed world in late 2017.
Gotcha. And so over that, let's just say 6 years. So over the last 6 years, how have you seen content strategy evolve in B2B tech? From, you leave higher ed, did you go from higher ed directly to Stoneleigh?
I went to a company called MZ. It was a labor data analytics company.
Oh, exciting. So you left higher ed, you go to labor data analytics. And so over the 6 years of you being there, I don't know if there was another job, but then Stoneleigh and uConnect, how have you seen content strategy evolve across the tech landscape?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is it seems like it has become more personal, more relatable, if that makes sense. Like when I was at MZ, a lot of the content we were working on and what I saw other similar companies and just other tech companies working on was white papers, research, gated content, just kind of some of those more what I consider to be sort of old school tactics.
Yep.
And formats that personally did not excite me at all. Like I know I've mentioned this a million times on this podcast, but I come from a journalism background. So I prefer to consume and produce content that is interview driven, that involves speaking to another person or multiple people, and then crafting a story from that. I cannot stand writing white papers and research. Absolutely hate it. So yeah, I have observed that trend in other companies and I have observed it in my own career. Like even when I was at MZ, I was trying to push for more personal, again, relatable conversational content that involved talking to our customers or talking to prospects and then using their expertise in our content. And then I started doing that at Stoneleigh. I started a podcast there where we were interviewing non-customers, like just leaders in the industry we were trying to sell into. And then I do that same thing at uConnect, where we interview customers and prospects on a podcast. We create articles based on each podcast episode. We're writing social posts, cutting video clips, sharing those on LinkedIn and YouTube. Like everything is funneled from this podcast that is interviewing people. And I have found it to be far more effective and also more enjoyable for me. Like I am not bored. I am excited about the work I get to do. And I feel like that's the sweet spot as a content marketer.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm actually going to answer the question. I'm going to probably want to answer a bunch of these questions myself.
Yeah,
too.
go for it.
But I think one of the funniest things that I've seen change over the years, and I noticed this with marketers who have been around and doing this in B2B tech or just marketers in general for like 20 years, is what the word, like the actual word content means to a marketer who's been doing this for 20 years versus I would say people like you or myself who have more of this view that content is multimedia, different styles, different approaches. I always say to people, our content is always written, video, audio, design. Like we try and do all four of those mediums out of anything that we create, very similarly to what you're talking about with a podcast. But I'll talk to these marketers who have been doing this for 20 years, and when they say the word content equals written. Like they don't say like they'll say to me like we need more content, and for me I'm like, all right, cool, like what kind? Do you want some video clips? Do you want to do an in-person shoot? Do you want to have some written content that comes out of it? Do we want to create some sort of like digital campaign flyer? Like what are we doing? And they're like, no, like a blog post. I'm like, oh, that doesn't even register with me as what the word content is. But it's fascinating to see the way that it's evolved over very much, I would say, the last 4 to 5 years. And COVID, like, expedited that even more because it used to be like video content was this behemoth because there wasn't, hey, let's all just capture content on our, like this view that if you're watching this versus listening to this is like, our houses. Like, this would be unacceptable in 2018. Like, what do you mean? You need to set up at a location, you need lights, you need cameras, you need to look professional, you need B-roll. Like, you would jump cuts on YouTube. What do you mean? You could just take out a whole sentence and whatever? Like, that just wasn't the case. And so content, the way that it's like accepted now, to me, is just much more than just written content. And I know you were just talking about that too, Meredith, which leads me to my next question. And I know it's a leading question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What do you believe are non-negotiable components of a successful content engine for a small team?
That's a good question. I think you're not going to be surprised to hear this answer, but for me, a non-negotiable is something that involves talking to the people, like to the people we're trying to reach, whether that's your customers, your prospects, just leaders in the industry. Like, again, that's what I have seen work most effectively in my work as a content marketer. It's what I find to be most enjoyable. Because I think at a base level, we all want to connect with fellow humans, right? We want to learn from our fellow humans. We'll take their word for it more than we'll take the word of a faceless corporation. So in my mind, a content strategy should be built around that. Of course, you should consider your goals, your resources, your budget, your personnel, all of that. But whenever I start thinking about a content strategy, I start thinking about what format, what strategy is going to allow me to get face time with those people, because not only will it help me create more compelling and relevant content, but it also helps me get up to speed faster for the industry. So like when I was at Stoneleigh, I think we started the podcast pretty soon after I joined, and I didn't know anything about the customer support, customer experience space. And it wasn't until I started interviewing those customer support leaders that I really got to understand their challenges, how they think, what types of roles they have, what they do on a day-to-day basis. And it made me an immensely better content creator for Stoneleigh. And it's the same thing at uConnect. So that's kind of my non-negotiable is like, I do not want to just write blog posts that are aggregating research from the internet. I want to talk to people. So whatever format allows me to do that, great. So far, I found podcasting to be a really good format for that.
Yeah, and as we've talked about on this show, for me, it doesn't always have to be the podcast, but it has to be something. Whether that is a flagship video series that's going to live on YouTube, whether it's just us conducting interviews with people and then turning that into a few pieces of content. But yeah, there's two ways to look at this. I'll start with, let's say I sold my stake in these agencies and I just went and I got hired as a CMO somewhere. It would be we're doing a podcast. We have to. I probably would go and get a job at some sort of B2B technology software type company. It will probably be something with what I enjoy is like longer sales cycles, bigger deals, so that you can really get into accounts, start to get to meet people, know people, understand it. So let's say it's an incredibly complex technology. I would want to get my education, and I talk about this a lot. I like that you do the podcast. We just had Joe Michalowski on this show. I liked that when he was at Mosaic, he did their financial technology podcast. I think that there is incredible power in marketing being able to own it in a complex industry. So let's just say that I'll just use one of our longtime clients who's in real-time data for cancer research. I don't know anything about that. I mean, I do to an extent now that I've been working with her and their team for 5 years, but still, even so, I mean, I'm not conducting the interviews. I don't understand it at the level that she does or their team does. I would want to run the podcast at that type of organization. Their target accounts are big hospitals and things like that. So I would want to be out there, talking to doctors, talking to scientists, trying to wrap my head around this very complex technology. It's a long sales cycle, trying to get an understanding of how we can break into these accounts, why these people, care about what they do and how they see it and how they talk about it, etc. It would be just a total non-negotiable for me, because I mean, then if I'm not doing it as part of the content strategy, I have to do it anyway. Like I would have to reach out to these like I gotta get an understanding of what I have to say to these people.
Right.
And then, oh, by the way, if I can have those conversations, also make relationships, also create content, there's just so many things that you could do out of it. And the second part of that I was just going to allude to is there's a reason why for our 50 customers, we have a flagship series of some sort for every single one of them. We have our podcast business, which obviously that is what that is. And then we have our full service marketing side, which is about 25 to 30 companies. And we are launching flagship series of some sort, or have a flagship series, or have a podcast for every single one of them, because it creates the content, educates our strategists, so on and so forth. I mean, it breaks it, has conversations with people in the space, levels up the brand. There's just so many things that can be done with it. So I think, yes. And when I said, Meredith, it was a leading question, I knew you knew where you were leading me. I knew how we were both going to answer, but still, it's a lot of fun to talk about. My next question for you is, when your boss or a boss in your past has said, we need to create content consistently, what are the 2 to 3 most important things to start with?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'm going to kind of tell the story of how we wound up going with a podcast at uConnect, because it's not originally what the plan was. So we knew we needed some kind of strategy, because for like the first year I was there, I was just sort of producing things ad hoc. I was running our social media pages, which is largely LinkedIn, and I was writing for the blog, but again, it was not super consistent. There wasn't much strategy in terms of like the topics we were covering. I was just trying to it's like playing whack-a-mole, like just trying to cover topics we needed covered immediately. So we knew we needed something more consistent. And again, we were trying to facilitate this learning amongst the career services leaders that we want to sell to. Like, we know that we don't have the expertise, so how can we like channel that expertise from these career leaders and like publish it in a way that other career leaders can consume? Originally, we were actually thinking of running like a guest posting program on our blog. So it would have been largely focused on written content, where I would serve as like the managing editor. Basically, we would have career leaders volunteer for like a quarter or something, write bi-weekly or monthly blog posts I would edit and publish. Mm-hmm. And it was a decent idea, but I was thinking, like, I don't know how this is going to work in reality. Like, chasing people down to hit deadlines, I have no control over whether they submit their content on time. And I could just see that it was going to be a fight, that it probably would be, because these career leaders are very busy already. So, and then I was thinking, I'm like, if we do a guest posting program, the only content we have to show for it is written. And I was thinking, okay, I think I have an idea. I think we should do a podcast. We can still interview these same people, still get their expertise and their knowledge, but I get to control the production timeline. I get to control when things go live. We get video from it, audio from it, and we can still produce articles based on the podcast. So we get the written side too. So it was like an overnight thing. Like, I'd been sort of noodling on this idea. And then just like overnight, I messaged my boss and I said, I think we need to go a different direction. I want to do a podcast. Here's why. And I wrote out this like long Google Doc with all my reasons why. And she saw it for what it was and agreed that it was the right approach. And then I had to go to our CEO, present my pitch, and I like showed him this document of all my reasonings for wanting to do a podcast. And he also saw the value right away. Like, he had some pushback on how we would handle production, like with outsourcing it. But on the whole, he saw the strategy and saw it was valuable. So it was a pretty quick change from our original strategy, but I think it was absolutely the right way to go. Like, we're still, again, facilitating that learning, but we get so much more content from it.
And I think that's really the message. We've actually done content around how to get your CEO to approve a podcast. And I think the big piece there that you mentioned is because leadership in many cases sees many things that marketing requests or has a desire to do as shiny object syndrome, or where, something's cool or hip. And we both see these things all the time on LinkedIn, some new term or some new this or that. is hip and hot and everybody's talking about it. And if you bring that to your CEO who's not with a marketing background, he or she is going to look at you and be like, yeah, I mean, cool. You said something else last week, and you said something the week before, and you said something the week before. So I think the podcast sometimes gets lumped in with that, where marketing says, let's do a podcast, and CEO or just whomever, the COO in many cases as well, and CFO in other cases as well, is like, oh, marketing wants to do a podcast. Like, cool.
Because of course they do.
Yeah, of course they want a podcast. But in reality, what it is from my perspective, and as you just mentioned, it's a way to get subject matter experts involved in the content without having to break their time barrier. I've worked with so many companies over the years who have said, we could not for the life of us get and we do a lot of podcasts too, very similar to kind of what we're doing now, like where we'll have subject matter experts from internal. I know we don't work together necessarily, but Tristan and I have done this podcast together, this podcast and another together before. And we'll do this kind of like internal thing. And we do it with our clients as well, where they want to they have very smart people. I mean, there's technology companies in many cases. I mean, these people are building the technology. They're from the background of whatever the technology is around, and they want to get their internal stakeholders involved in the content, and they just can't. I mean, you send some very smart person who is not involved in marketing at all, an assignment that they got to write something. I'll tell you a funny story actually about we work with an Inc. 100 science company, and I don't know, I'm not going to say their name. I don't know if I signed something. And we work with an Inc. 100 science company. It's kind of out of our typical. Although their marketing function at the highest level of their corporate is very small still, and they wanted people for years to get involved with the content, but the issue was these are scientists, and for them to write something, I mean, that is like their literal career. Is if they can't just write something. Like, hey, I just need 1,500 words. Like, just hook me up with a blog post. They're gonna be like, it's like I mean, you're asking them to. This is their name is tied to it. Like their name is I'll crank something out on LinkedIn in the morning in 20 minutes, and if you hate it, that's fine. I'll write another one tomorrow. No big deal. But a scientist isn't going to do that. They're going to take months to write a 1,500 word blog post, but they'll talk about their research. They'll jump on. They'll tell you all you want to know about their research. They'll tell you how they got started, what the problem was, what their hypothesis was, how they tested it, so on and so forth. They'll have no problem with that. But writing about their research, completely different ballgame.
It seems so much more high stakes.
Yeah, exactly. And it is in many cases. So you're not always just fighting with time. You're also fighting with, and I don't know if you've seen this, Meredith, especially being in higher ed, but I've noticed this with more than just that example is sometimes it's not just the time that they're busy. It's that they really care. And they're scared to write something that their colleagues or peers at other companies will read and say this wasn't great, because they are they've been in many cases in that space 15, 20 years. They have a reputation. And I think sometimes we don't think about the nuance of what it takes for other people to contribute to content.
Right. Yeah. It's so much more of a mental load too, I think, than just hopping on a call and talking about it. Even now, when people reach out on LinkedIn, asking about my career or whatever, I used to just respond via text, in a DM. And now I'm let's hop on a call. It's so much easier to just talk it out than it is to try and write down my thoughts, which is ironic because I consider myself a writer still.
Yeah.
But I have transitioned so much from being just purely a writer to being more of a multimedia producer in my career. It's crazy. I do so much more, multimedia production than I do writing, honestly.
Yeah. And it's interesting that entire thing is why I really like marketing to own the podcast, because I do see a lot of perfectionism when I work with subject matter experts as hosts, whether it is CEO whether it is just some sort of, subject matter expert at the company who they think it's going to provide more value by having someone who is, noted in the space, blah, blah, blah. But what I find is it actually hinders the podcast more often than not. We have lots of successful podcasts with subject matter experts or executives. I'm not saying it won't work, but and I get asked this a lot, if I have my choice, I'm like, it's no contest, because marketing isn't going to be afraid to ship because they have to get things off. Marketing isn't going to be, afraid of what comes out. I mean, it's just it. And then, oh, by the way, your marketing team is getting thoroughly educated by subject matter experts on the space. Yeah, I talked to Joe about this. As I mentioned, you should listen to the episode if you haven't, audience, that we did with. But I mean, he and I had this whole conversation about some of his imposter syndrome. And I said to him, and this was when he was a client not working for us. And I said to him, I was like, you've done almost 100 episodes of your podcast where you talk to CFOs at companies, like big companies. I would argue that I could probably count on two hands in, let's just say 2023. I could probably count on two hands in the entire world, people who talk to 100 CFOs in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
That's just incredible power. I mean, we're marketers, but we're getting to hear from these people. I mean, Joe or you with higher ed could probably walk into a room of people who are all subject matter experts in that space, and you could not only hold your own, but people may be coming up to you and being like, wow, what are you hearing? What's going on? I mean, it's got to be what it's like being a reporter, I would think.
Yep. It's literally like having your own beat. My beat is career services now. And I just do it for a company instead of a unbiased news organization. But I think one other thing I'll add too, on why marketing should own it, for all of the reasons you mentioned, but also because most often is someone on the marketing team is going to have more experience interviewing. And I know we've talked about this on the podcast before, but that is such an underrated skill. Not everybody knows how to conduct an interview, how to make guests feel comfortable during an interview, how to ask follow-up questions, how to listen actively. That is a skill. And I think it's more likely you're going to find that on the marketing team than you are maybe in your CEO or your subject matter experts. Not always, but just in my personal experience, that's been the case.
Yeah, if we're using, and that's what I'm asked a lot, is if you're using, what's your recommendation? I'm like, my recommendation is different every time. I got to have my very politically correct answer. And then I'm like, but if all things being equal, what have I seen be successful more often and have more value? It's going to be your marketing team running it for XYZ reason, market research, the fact that it is literally how we're evaluated.
Yeah,
the subject matter
that's
expert,
motivating.
Yeah, the subject matter expert is not going to be asked maybe to an extent, how much content did you get out? What did it do? Whatever. But that's going to fall to marketing. And then marketing sitting there going pointing at the subject matter expert, Johnny wouldn't record. We tried. So what, I think that there's a lot of value in that. I wanted to ask you a question just about your process. So when it comes to, and I know you've talked on this podcast about your content calendar, how you stay organized, et cetera, but what are some of the steps that you would recommend to building a lean, effective content engine?
Yeah. I think, of course, once you decide on your strategy and the format you want to go with, it's really just deciding on the cadence and sticking to it, religiously sticking to it. It is a point of pride with me that I have not missed a podcast episode launch. I have not missed a weekly newsletter launch since we started both of those initiatives at uConnect, because I know the cadence is so important, not only for the audience to build trust in what we're producing, but also to build the habit myself. That's how I keep things going, because as I've mentioned on this podcast, I don't really have an obvious built out content calendar. I just know in my head, okay, every other Tuesday, podcast episodes coming out. Every Thursday morning, newsletters going out. And I just have that cadence in my head at all times. It is a habit at this point. So yeah, I would just decide on that. And I'm sorry, I forgot your original question. Can you repeat it?
Yeah, no problem. It was just around your process, just like,
Oh, right.
yeah. So consistency, key. And then if you're laying it out, like, so do you have people who you are bringing on the show and then you have a process afterwards? Is it
Oh,
you
yeah,
doing the
yeah.
work? Like, what is the actual process there for getting it all out and being able to have a successful content strategy?
Oh, yeah. All right, let's do it. Okay. So, yes, I definitely know generally who I want to interview. Like, it is a career services leader of some kind in a career center in a college or a university. And a lot of our guests so far have been customers. So I will ask our customer success team, like quarterly, hey, do you have any recommendations of someone that you know is either doing something cool and innovative that fits the theme of the show, or is a very enthusiastic, engaging speaker, or ideally both. And so they'll give me ideas on who to reach out to, and they'll make introductions. Sometimes I will see a LinkedIn, like one of these career leaders make a LinkedIn post that's really interesting, and I'll reach out and say, "Hey, can you expand on that in an episode?" So that's another way. Or sometimes I'm just kind of looking for influencers in the space who I know are respected by their peers, and so I'll try to get them on. So that's kind of how I find guests. For scheduling, I use Calendly. Like everything is set up and automated on Calendly, which is super handy. Makes it way easier for me, allows our guests to schedule on their own convenience at whatever time works best for them. And then, of course, we record in Riverside, which we're using right now. It's a great tool, really enjoy it. And then all post-production is outsourced. So we use an agency to help us with audio and video production. I used to do the video production here at uConnect and thankfully was able to offload that as well last year, which saves me a ton of time. So we outsourced that. We also outsourced the graphic design to a freelance designer that we have. And I had him create templates in Figma that are super easy for me to just plug in new pictures, plug in new titles for episodes, and just re-export. It's so easy. I would highly recommend doing it that way. Let's see, for distribution, we use Transistor as our podcast hosting platform. And then we get clips, like video clips from the agency that we use, put those on LinkedIn, put those on YouTube. All episodes are distributed via our weekly newsletter, which has over 1,400 subscribers now. So that's a pretty good way to get that out. And yeah, I think that's about it.
And is that your main content source? Like, are you doing any other things outside of the podcast?
Yeah. So there's the articles we publish. So again, a lot of these are based on topics covered in the podcast. And right now we're publishing those on about a monthly cadence. Mm-hmm. I would love to do a little bit more, but that's just honestly all I have time for. And for that, we're using a freelance writer right now. Every once in a while, I'll jump in and I'll write something too. But in general, we use freelancers for those blog posts. I write the content brief. I send them the transcript, make sure they have everything they need. I edit the posts when they come in. But yeah, that's helped a lot just because I am pulled in so many different directions right now. So definitely relying on outsourcing as much as possible.
Yeah, it's super interesting because when we roll out our most basic content strategy for our clients, I mean, that is what it is. I mean, it's we're going to do a series of some sort. What we do on top of that will be more ad hoc, or we'll figure out other strategies or what have you, or, project-based things. But it's always around consistent show, because that's how you keep your brand fresh in terms of what you're saying to people. It's how you keep your content marketing fresh, your social media fresh, etc. Is just having something consistent. And it may seem to some folks like, oh, so you just run your podcast is your whole content strategy. And I'm like, start there. Mm-hmm. Like, get that first. If you're doing that, then you're having things go out consistently on an ongoing basis. You're not trying to recreate the wheel for every single time you try and put out new content, and then you can add there. Like, Meredith, if you were to get 2-3 more people on your content team, let's just say, then you can do additional things. You'll be like, all right, cool, like let's write some really cool lead magnet that we can have go out and we can leverage, stuff from 20 episodes of the show, write some new fresh content, whatever. But what it comes down to is when you're strapped for time, budget, resources, what have you, the show is going to be your best approach to having content go out consistently and keep things fresh and have things to say to the world. And that what you're doing is like that we have to have that for every client. And I think that's just so crucial. We're coming up on time here a little bit. I have one last question for you. So this can be answered qualitative or quantitative. I'm always interested in how people answer this question. But after you implemented this content strategy at uConnect, what were some of the impacts that it's had on the business?
Yeah, I'll share some quantitative and qualitative
Very nice.
results. So numbers-wise, we have seen a dramatic increase in website traffic. Like, I don't know the exact percentage, but it's like dramatic. So a lot more traffic to our website, but just because there's more reasons for people to go there, because there's new like the podcast is on our website, the blog's on the website, all of that is there. So yeah, more web traffic, more inbound website leads, which is great because that's something that we're measured on. So those are two like major, was that quantitative? Is that the numbers one?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. And then qualitatively, and this has been really fun for me, is that people will, like career services leaders will connect with me on LinkedIn and say, hey, I love the newsletter. I love your work on the podcast. Like, can we connect at in-person conferences? If I'm there, they'll tell me this directly. But if I'm not, people like they're telling my coworkers, hey, we love the podcast. Is Meredith here? Like, we love the newsletter. And that's so cool to get that kind of feedback because that doesn't often happen in marketing. Sometimes it feels like you're screaming into the void and you don't know if anyone's actually listening or reading. And so, yeah, just getting that feedback is everything. It's very motivating because people seem to be not only enjoying it, but they will tell us about times where they have implemented strategies that they've learned about from our newsletter or the podcast. I'm like, yes, that's exactly what we wanted.
We had a client listen to this show 2 times. She listened to one episode twice. She liked it so much. So shout out Ruby if you're listening. Those kinds of like soft touches of like, hey, the world is actually listening to what you're saying means so much. Of course, the quantitative metrics are what, executives are going to ask about. Those CFOs, COOs, CEOs who are, footing the bill for the marketing initiatives. But for us, it's amazing to hear people say things like, hey, I actually listened to your show.
So they share that with you. Like, For anyone listening, if you have found value in a piece of marketing content, tell the creator. They will appreciate it. You'll make their day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that is it for today, Meredith. Audience, it was great. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Tech Qualified, and we'll see you later.
Thanks for checking out Tech Qualified. This show is brought to you by New North, a marketing agency that helps turn your small, scrappy marketing team into a growth engine. To find out more about New North or check out more episodes of this show, go to newnorth.com/techqualified.